So, as we move through the story, the sniper has obviously been shot at this point, and the blood is oozing through the sleeve of his coat. There was no pain, just a deadened sensation as if the arm has been cut off. Now, I think that obviously is a literal explanation of the pain that he's experienced, but I think again comes back to this idea about him losing his sense of humanity, losing his sense of being a human being because of this sort of numbing effect of the pain um, that he experiences partly when he's shot. Quickly, he drew his knife from his pocket, opened it on the breastwork of the parapet on the side of the building, and ripped open the sleeve. There was a small hole where the bullet had entered. On the other side, there was no hole. The bullet had lodged in the bone. It must have fractured it. He bent the arm below the elbow. The arm bent back easily. He ground his teeth to overcome the pain. Now, I think partly what you can see here is in the syntax a very clear explanation and representation of quite straightforward thoughts that perhaps gives us a sense of his youth, sense of perhaps the simplicity of his mind, but also the simplicity of his focus, and maybe the sense in which he has just got a single focus on um, survival because he seems like he is in conflict with everything around him, the setting, the night time, the opposite sniper, even partly with himself. Then taking out his field dressing, he ripped open the packet with his knife. He broke the neck of the iodine bottle and let the bitter fluid drip into the wound. A paroxysm of pain swept through him. A paroxysm is like a wild spasm, so much so that it would make you shake. I think this is what brings him to life. And so, you think of here the internal conflict in this particular man. He at times feels numb and dead, and like his experience is he isn't actually registering experience emotionally, and this seems to bring him back to life. He placed the cotton wadding over the wound and wrapped the dressing over it. He tied the ends with his teeth. Then he lay still against the parapet, and closing his eyes, he made an effort of will to overcome the pain. So this again, this conflict between himself and his antagonist, and actually the surroundings and the setting itself, gives him the sense of simple focus on survival. In the street beneath all was still. The setting here, I think, mirrors the sense of lifelessness that perhaps mirrors his internal state. The setting itself is empty. His emotional experience is empty because it has to be for him to survive. The armoured car had retired speedily over the bridge with the machine gunner's head hanging lifeless over the turret. The woman's corpse lay still in the gutter. And so all of that sense of lifelessness is seen through this woman just becoming another feature of the setting. The setting itself is defined by the conflict between life and death, by the conflict between these two snipers that is itself tearing civilization apart. So the setting itself becomes the sort of the portrait of that conflict between sides. The sniper lay still for a long time, nursing his wounded arm and planning escape. Morning must not find him wounded on the roof. The enemy on the opposite roof covered his escape. He must kill that enemy, and he could not use his rifle. So again, the conflict here shows how war causes him to objectify and to dehumanize his enemy. The enemy on the opposite roof covered his escape. He must kill that enemy, and he could not use his rifle. He had only the revolver to do it, and he thought of a plan. So his whole purpose is focused on escaping in conflict with this antagonist, and the simple focus of his plan is created by this conflict. Taking off his cap, he placed it over the muzzle of his rifle, and so there's an irony here involved in the fact that his plan involves people being mistaken for, objects being mistaken for people and people being mistaken for objects. His trick here is to get the opposite sniper to confuse the gun with the hat on with him. And that is precisely what the story seems to be suggesting that he is guilty of, and the enemy is of not seeing human beings for what they are as people. Then he pushed the rifle slowly upward over the parapet until the cap was visible from the opposite side of the street. Almost immediately there was a report and a bullet pierced the centre of the cap. And so here, that is immediate. Again, what this gives us is a sense of almost kind of claustrophobic conflict. He's so pinned to this position on the roof that everything seems like it is against him. His immediate enemy, the setting itself, the nighttime. The sniper slanted the rifle forward, the cap clipped down into the street. Then, catching the rifle in the middle, the sniper dropped his left hand over the roof and let it hang lifelessly. After a few moments, he let the rifle drop to the street. Then he sank to the roof, dragging his hand with him. And so, again, this conflict between himself and this rival sniper becomes one of a kind of mental competition, becomes a contest of wills and minds rather than necessarily a physical one. Crawling quickly to his feet, he peered up at the corner of the roof. His ruse has succeeded. And so a ruse is a kind of a ploy or a plot that he has planned, and it's worked here to trick the opposite sniper. But again, looking up at the roof, the setting is what's again revealing this conflict between him and his antagonist. The other sniper, seeing the cap and rifle fall, thought that he had killed his man. He was now standing before a row of chimney pots, looking across with his head clearly silhouetted against the western sky. And so again, the setting is precisely what's allowing this man to stand out. He was now standing before a row of chimney pots, looking across with his head clearly silhouetted against the sky. So the setting is what is allowing this Republican sniper to see him clearly and in the end to shoot him. The Republican sniper smiled and lifted his revolver above the edge of the parapet. Again, this is the first sign of joy or pleasure in this particular man's life. And it shows us the way in which he has become dehumanized because he's gaining pleasure out of the conflict between himself and his rival and the act of killing. The distance was about 50 yards. A hard shot in the dim light, and his right arm was paining him like 1,000 devils. He took steady aim. His hand trembled with eagerness. The simile here was paining him like 1,000 devils seems to be suggesting a connection with sin, but also that sin association, the 1,000 devils of this pain, is what is urging him to commit this act of atrocity, of murder. He took a steady aim, and his hand trembled with eagerness. And again, that sense of joy and pleasure comes across in his characterization here. Pressing his lips together, he took a deep breath through his nostrils and fired. He was almost deafened with the report, and his arm shook with the recoil. Then, when the smoke cleared, he peered across and uttered a cry of joy. So again, that sense of pleasure is developed. His enemy had been hit, and again, that phrase is dehumanizing, and it is in the context of conflict that dehumanization or objectification is carried out. He was reeling over the parapet in his death agony. He struggled to keep his feet, but he was slowly falling forward as if in a dream. So in this description here, this simile, the war gives the impression that reality is not existing, and that reality itself is more of a hallucination, that what he's seeing is unreal, and that again shows us his distance from reality. The rifle fell from his grasp, hit the parapet, fell over, bounded off the pole of a barber shop beneath, and then clattered onto the pavement. And so this sentence itself is really important in terms of the setting, because it's showing us clause by clause this rifle bouncing on these different features of very ordinary civilian settings. It hit the parapet, fell over, bounded off the pole of a barber shop, and then clattered on the pavement. They're all reminders, urban reminders, that war can make its way into everyday life. So the setting here is showing us the conflict between man and man, but also the conflict between society and war itself. Then the dying man on the roof crumpled up and fell forward. The body turned over and over in space and hit the ground with a dull thud. Leonard lay still. The sniper looked at his enemy falling and he shuddered. The lust of battle died in him. He became bitten by remorse. So again, the sniper here, this conflict between his need for survival and his sense of morality is captured here because his passions die. His passions have died and he regains full rational awareness. And because of that, a sense of humanity, he comes back to his mind. And that this passion of bloodlust, this passion of wanting to kill an enemy dies as soon as it is fulfilled. And so this internal conflict, I think, is portrayed here. That he must kill to survive, but obviously feels a sense of um, morality that has been undermined by his murderous act. The sweat stood out in beads on his forehead, weakened by his wound in the long summer day of fasting and watching on the roof, revolted from the sight of the shattered mass of his dead enemy. Again, that description there shows us his dehumanization, the shattered mass of his dead enemy. His teeth shattered, he began to gibber to himself, cursing the wall, cursing himself, cursing everybody. So the syntax here with these successive clauses and these repetitions, this is the word order and the sentence structure, shows us, I think, the man losing control of his emotions, which is making him human again, but is showing us that internal conflict between having emotions and morality and being an effective soldier. So his man versus self form of conflict here is being a human being and being a soldier. And that conflict that between sides is what's creating this internal conflict in him as the protagonist. He looked at the smoking revolver with his hand. With an oath, he hurled it to the roof at his feet. The revolver went off with a concussion, and the bullet whizzed past the sniper's head. And I think this is a kind of metaphor for his internal conflict, a sort of literalization of it. Because he here, in his hatred and his self-disgust, throws the gun down and it nearly kills him. And so that shows us the way his self-hatred is poisonous and dangerous to him, and that war itself is a type of self-harm when you are forced to kill. So this again shows us the internal conflict. He then takes a whiskey from his pocket, and that shows us that he has to evade extremes of his experience. He has to escape the reality of violence and murder in order to actually survive in this. And he felt reckless under the influence of the spirit. He decides to leave the roof and look for his company commander to report. This is another important description of the setting. Everywhere around was quiet. There was not much danger in going through the streets. He picked up his revolver and put it in his pocket. Then he crawled down through the skylight to the house underneath. So there's a false sense of tranquility at this particular moment in the description of setting before the climax of his internal conflict at the end of the story itself. So when the sniper reaches the laneway on the street level, he felt a sudden curiosity as to the identity of the enemy sniper who he had killed. He decided that he was a good shot, whoever he was. He wondered, did he know him? Perhaps he had been in his own company before the split in the army. He decided to risk going over to have a look at him. And so the conflict is created where there shouldn't be one. And I think this is in terms of the split of the Irish fighters into the IRA and the Free State Army. You know, he wonders who this particular individual might be. And there is a sense that he may have known him. And so the conflict between parts of society is evident here, but also his internal conflict, you know, between his status as a soldier, a cold-hearted soldier, needing to be that way in order to kill, and then a human being. The human being side of him is what, well, the humane side of him is what creates this curiosity to go and look at the enemy. He decided to risk going over and having a look at him. He peered around the corner into O'Connell Street. In the upper part of the street there was heavy firing, but around here was all quiet. So again, that setting shows a contrast where there's heavy firing and conflict in one place, but here is quiet. And I think that mirrors his internal state, a sense of aggressive conflict in tension with the quiet silence of his more peaceful side as a human being. The sniper darted across the street. A machine gun tore up the ground around him with a hail of bullets, but he escaped. So again, that sense of the setting itself just constantly be fighting against him is given with every single description like this, where the setting is portrayed showing us his the way in which it is in conflict with him. Threw himself face downward beside the corpse. The machine gun stopped. So he's forced here to engage with death. He's forced to engage with the consequence of his cold brutality. And then the sniper turned over his dead body and looked into his brother's face. And so, again, the irony here of this ending, where you can be completely dehumanized to such an extent that you end up killing your own brother, you end up killing a family member, shows us that this extreme conflict goes deeper than blood, goes deeper than family or relations.